you can see many resources. Pipe WC is showing no less than 203 resources. Do this on a vanilla Kubernetes installation, you will see about 70 resources. And that really indicates major differences between OpenShift and Kubernetes. Right, there is one more thing that I want to show you, and that is OC Explain. OC Explain. Let's do OC Explain on deployment config, which is giving what? It's giving an explanation. Look, here we have a description. So this is on-system explanation telling you what you can do. And I'm doing this on deployment config because I'm just expecting that not everybody is using deployment config on a daily basis. We see a structure that you will find at the top level of the resource definition at all times. So there's API version, kind, metadata, spec, and status. API version is telling you which API this resource is coming from. Kind is telling you which specific resource we are talking about. Metadata is about naming properties and labels and such. And then we have the spec. The spec is a specification. This matches to how the resource currently is running. Do I have DCs, OC get DC for deployment config? Yeah, I have PostgreSQL. Look, if I use OC get DC PostgreSQL -o YAML, pipeless, then I see this API version. And in the API version, it is explaining the API that I'm using. I see this kind, which is the deployment config. I see the metadata, and I see the spec. And the spec, that's the specification of the resource that you want to use. And if you want to figure out what exactly is this revision history limit, well, use OC Explain on deployment config.spec, and you will find an explanation of revision history limit. I really, really like OC Explain. OC Explain is simple, and it is offering information that is coming straight out of the API, and that makes it very usable. We will see several occasions where we are going to use OC Explain to get more information about what you want to do. Because, you know, your ultimate goal is to pass the exam. And in order to pass the exam, you need to know about the different properties that you can define in the resource. Also, I want to show you OC Explain --recursive. Let me make it a little bit more specific. Let me do an OC Explain on deployment config.spec --recursive. Recursive, that is how you write it. And what do we get? We get a recursive explanation. So what is it? Well, it's just showing us all the resources, all the properties that you can use in deployment config.spec. And this doesn't only work for deployment config. This is a generic standard, and you can use it for any application that you are running in OpenShift. So all resources OC Explain is working. Do not forget this --recursive, because you are going to be in situations where you think, oh dear, I know that I need this or that specific setting, but where exactly did I set it? Well, in that case, OC Explain --recursive is awesome. Also relevant is OC API versions. This is more focused view, telling you if multiple versions of the API are available. Here, for instance, we have policy v1 and policy v1 beta 1. These API versions are subject to change. The operators, that's a nice one, operators.coreos.com. We can see no less than 4 different API versions. You know what happens to old API versions? They go away if newer versions are available. Now, the thing is, you are going to define your API resources using YAML files. And in the YAML file, you are going to refer to a specific version of the API. And at the moment that you updated your OpenShift stack and the old API version is no longer available, your YAML file will fail. And then you should investigate what is going on and make sure that it works in the new environment. So OC OC API versions is what that is about. All right, folks. With that, I'm pushing away the remainder of this slide, and I am going to show you the next slide, which is, as I said earlier, where the heat is on: user and role management, authentication and authorization. Oh, just one thing about the lesson numbering. The lesson numbers correspond to the lesson numbers in the recorded video course. There is a recorded video course for EX280. This is a live course. In the live course, I always share my latest and greatest insights. So software is evolving, you know, and I can't always update the recorded video course if changes apply. But in order to make it easier for you to find information back in the recorded video course, I have tried to match the lesson numbers. On some occasions, you will find that there's no match in the recorded video course. Then it's a topic that has been added later. But most of what we are talking about here is also in the recorded video course if you want to watch it back quietly. Okay, I am going to tell you about authentication and authorization. And first, I have a serious bunch of slides. And then I have a demo. So I am going to strictly separate between the slides and the demo. I like to do ad hoc commands every now and then, but I know in this part, if I do the ad hoc commands, I might mess up my demo later. So I do apologize. There's a risk that we will be talking about slides until we go on the next break. But I'll make it up with you. And after the break, we will do much more demos. So here we go, user and role management. So we need to talk about authentication and authorization. What is this about? Well, when accessing OpenShift cluster resources, a user makes a request to the API. That goes for people who are accessing resources in the cluster. It also goes for API resources that are accessing resources in the cluster. And we need an authentication layer, and this authentication layer is responsible for authentication of the user. Authentication of the user is about verification of the identity of the user. Once the identity of the user is verified, the authorization layer, that's the next layer, uses the RBAC policy to determine what the user is authorized to do. RBAC is a role-based access control. And generically in Kubernetes, we have three entities. We have the role binding, and we have the user. A role is a set of permissions. The user is an entity that authenticates, and the role binding is what connects a user to a role. That's basically what it is all about. Do also notice, I'm trying to give you a sketch of the complete picture now. Do also notice that roles have a scope. And there are two scopes that matter. Some roles are cluster scoped. Some roles are namespace scoped. And what does that mean? Well, a cluster scope role applies to the entire cluster. The namespace scope role applies to just one single namespace. This is a fundamental difference on the exam. And if you don't get this difference, you will dramatically fill your exam with very limited amount of points. So cluster scope and namespace scope. We'll talk much more about this later, but I already wanted to give you this insight. So if API requests, I'm back on the slide here, if API requests contain invalid authentication, it is authenticated as a request by the anonymous system user. And the anonymous system user really can't do anything. There's really not much possible for the anonymous system user. Now in OpenShift we have authentication methods. And the important thing to realize is OAuth. OAuth access tokens, use access tokens to authenticate a request. And to set up secure authentication, you need to configure OAuth. OAuth is where you are going to connect your OpenShift to an external authentication provider. That's what it's about, an external authentication provider. And many external authentication providers are available. And this is something where OpenShift leaves it completely open to what you want to do. So you want to authenticate using your Active Directory users, then that is possible. You want to authenticate using LDAP users, that is possible. Anything is possible by using the appropriate OAuth authentication provider. Just to get an insight of how OAuth works, you must have come across that some websites want to know your identity, and you can use Google or LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever as the authentication provider. The idea is you just go to the external authentication provider to authenticate. Once you are authenticated, the external authentication provider is giving you an authentication token, and based on that token, you can do whatever you need to do in role-based access control. For your EX280, an important part of the exam is where you are going to set up OAuth. Now, of all the fancy ways that exist to set up OAuth, you are going to use HTPassW. That's the simplest authentication provider that you can imagine. But it does give a clear impression of what is going on. There is another way, and that's the X509 client certificate. In X509 client certificates, you use TLS certificates to authenticate requests. How does that work? Well, that works in a way where the OpenShift cluster is generating TLS certificates. So you create a user account where the user account really is just a public key and a private key. This user public key is signed in a public key certificate, and this public key certificate is going to be used by the user account to get access to resources in the cluster. This is the default setting. So our Kube admin user and our developer user on a default installation of OpenShift are X509 users. I will tell you later that Code Ready Containers, aka OpenShift Local, is taking a slightly different approach, but the default authentication is used by X509 client certificates. That's where your Kube admin user is coming from. So TLS certification, continue on the slide, is provided by with the default Kube admin user, and certificates are stored in the .kube directory. SG, I don't know, to your question. I need to look it up. Your Google is as good as my Google. Good. The authentication operator. What is the OpenShift authentication operator? That's one of the extensions that allows you to run an OAuth server in an OpenShift context. And the server provides access tokens to users that authenticate to the API, and based on these access tokens, you will get access. So the OAuth server works with an identity provider to validate the identity of the requester. So the OAuth server is making the external request, and that is really pluggable and allows you to connect to any authentication provider. So the server connects the user with the identity, creates the OAuth access token, which is next granted to the user. So how does it really work? Well, in OpenShift, you have the OAuth server. The user authenticates. The OAuth server is handling the authentication. And when it receives some credentials, it's passing it through to the external authentication provider. Once the external authentication provider has okayed, the OAuth server will okay it as well and will be able to connect the user to the requested resources. Now, what is the procedure? Well, the procedure in setting up a completely authenticated and secured OpenShift environment is roughly a two-step procedure, where first you need to set up OAuth with an identity provider, and second you need to configure RBAC for the entities that you have just created. So it's nice if you have users, but if you don't assign any permissions to the users using role-based access control, it is kind of useless. That is the point that I'm making here. All right, let me continue with the next part, which is about user and role management and managing users. So hey, quick demo. I can't help myself. Just doing slides is so boring. I am going to look up the OpenShift documentation. Why am I doing that? OpenShift documentation. OpenShift documentation is available on the exam as well. And that is really good news. The bad news is that the OpenShift documentation is available in PDFs. It's not the most accessible way. In fact, I don't like the way how you search the OpenShift documentation, but it is available on the exam. I'm just looking up the right way. OpenShift documentation, I think we need OCP, OpenShift Container Platform, version 4.10. The message here, folks, is that you should learn how this OpenShift documentation is organized. Here on the left, we can see the different documentation guides. And you should practice these documentation guides to find which guide contains which type of documentation. The guide that I'm looking at right here is authentication and authorization. That is all about the users. And in this authentication and authorization, you will see part like configuring the internal OAuth server, configuring the identity providers and everything. What I want you to understand is that everything that I'm going to show you is also in this guide. So you probably are getting lost once I start overloading you with the procedure, because the procedure is pretty long. I need you to be aware that this procedure is well documented. So what can you do on the exam? If on the exam you need to configure an HTTPS-WD identity provider, then here you can see the procedure, including all of the commands. My friends, this is really important information for the exam, because I'm going to share information about procedures that you are never going to be able to memorize. It's just too many steps. And to make it a bit easier for yourself, make sure you find it in the documentation. Tomorrow, when this class is almost over, at the end of this class, I have a list of topics and where to find it in the documentation. And that is what you need to practice before you go in the exam. I mean, it is good to practice procedures, but it's even better if you practice how to find this information while you are on the exam. Now back to the slides, back to the procedure. So what are we going to do first? Well, I am going to show you later how we are going to set up the HTTPS-WD authentication provider. So let's try to understand. We have nice and fancy authentication providers, which allow you to authenticate users on LDAP, on Active Directory, with Google, and so on. We are going for the very simple authentication provider. That's the HTTPS-WD authentication provider. HTTPS-WD is what you use for the HTTPD web server, and it basically generates a file, a local file, with users and their passwords. Now, what is the procedure? You first are going to make sure that this HTTPS-WD file is created. Now, in OpenShift, it makes no sense if your configuration is just in a configuration file, because configuration files by nature are not cloud native. The next step is to get this information in the cloud. And how do we do that? Well, in cloud, we do that by using a secret. So you put the users in a secret. And once you have the users in the secret, well, you can access it from the cloud. You know, the secret is the cloud-based configuration file with a little bit of security. Next, you are going to configure OAuth with an external authentication provider, and that is HTTPS-WD. So, folks, I know in real life HTTPS-WD is lame. This is not a class about real life. This is a class about the EX280 exam, so HTTPS-WD it is. Next, you are going to create groups. And you can only add users to groups that exist in OAuth, because otherwise it doesn't work. Then you are going to determine which cluster roles to use, which project roles to use. And optionally, you are going to use verbs to create your own roles. Honestly, there's a lot of roles available by default in OpenShift, so I don't think you need to do these verbs. This is probably something that can be forgotten for the exam, but I just want to be complete here. Last, create service accounts. What is the thing about these service accounts? Well, a user is for people, but apart from people, you also have applications in your OpenShift environment. And these applications, these are pods. And these pods might need access to resources in your cluster as well. And that is what service accounts are used for. So you create service accounts for pods that need more than default access to API resources. I am first going to show you about the users, then I'm going to show you about the service accounts. And again, I first want to talk you through the procedure by having a look at the slide. Hopefully you will start to understand a bit of what is going on. Once you understand what's going on the slides, I will demonstrate it. That demo is definitely after our next break. So user types is what we see on the next slide. You have regular users. Regular users represent a user object that is granted access to the cluster platform. We have system users. System users are created automatically to allow system components to access specific resources. And system users are users like system:admin, which is full admin access, or system:OpenShift Registry, which is a system user that allows OpenShift to get images from the OpenShift registry. Or system:node:server1.example.com, which is a system user that is created in an OpenShift cluster to give you access to server1.example.com. These system users here are users that you shouldn't have to use on the exam. If on the exam you feel you are using system users, you are probably doing something wrong. There is one demo, by the way, in which we are going to use system users, but that is one demo only. Apart from that, there are the service accounts. What is a service account? Service account is for special system accounts that you can use to give additional privileges to pods or to deployments. Like deployer, which is used to create deployments, like builder, which is used to create build configs in source to image, and there is more. We talk about service accounts separately when we are done with the people users. Now, HTTPS-WD. Why are we talking about HTTPS-WD again? Because we need an external authentication provider. There are many authentication providers available. And we work with the authentication provider that is the simplest of all, and that is HTTPS-WD. So HTTPS-WD is used as the OAuth input to create regular users, and to create HTTPS-WD, you use the HTTPS-WD utility and add users to an HTTPS-WD file. If you are using code-ready containers on Windows, you need to dig up some HTTPS-W utility that works on Windows as well. That might be a challenge. I know nothing about Windows, so I can't help you with that, but I would just advise you look for HTTPS-WD on Windows, or you generate a file somewhere else. That is a lame solution, but it might be the only solution that you've got. Now, how does it work? HTTPS-WD works with a couple of arguments. Here we have the argument -c. -c creates a new configuration file. Notice that -c is only used the first time you run the HTTPS-WD command. If you run it the second time as well, you will overwrite your previously existed configuration file. Then you name the configuration file, you name the user, you name the password. Is that a clear text password? Yes, that is a clear text password. Nobody cares about security for HTTPS-WD. What you care about is to get the OAuth up and running, and this is the easiest way to get it going. Again, HTTPS-WD is where you store these users. But next, you need to make sure that these HTTPS-WD users are provided in the cloud. And you do that by using a secret. Because local files on my computer are not readable from the cloud. You need to store it in the OpenShift cluster. And this secret is what you are going to use with the OAuth HTTPS WD identity provider. So OC creates secret generic HTTPS WD secret. That's the name of the secret. From file, that is how you put the content of a configuration file in the secret, minus n OpenShift config. That's for the OpenShift config namespace. The secret must be in the OpenShift config namespace. Again, namespaces are pretty important in an OpenShift environment. And once you've done that, it's time to talk a little bit in more detail about OAuth. So what again is OAuth? Well, OAuth allows OpenShift to fetch users externally using an identity provider, and that is the cool stuff. And you can get it from external. TH is mentioning HTTPSW is not available on MyURL 9. Oh boy, then you need to install it, TH. Hey folks. I don't want to be the nasty instructor here, but if you are going to do RedHat exams, my advice, whatever you are doing on RedHat, make sure you have at least Linux knowledge at an RHCSA level, because then you are not asking HTTPS WD is not available, but then you are going to set up your repositories and use commands like, let me type it, th, like sudo dnf provides /HTTPS WD, and that is going to get you the name of some package that includes HTTPS WD. If the problem persists, TH, please post in group chat. Maybe somebody else can try who is also on RHEL 8 what it is bringing you. But what it is bringing me is HTTPD tools. So DNF install HTTPD tools. That should help you on RHEL 9. But more important, TH, you should be familiar with commands like DNF provides and other Linux basic stuff. If you miss this Linux basic stuff, you'll be in problem on the exam. And again, that goes for all of the Red Hat exams. Make sure that you have knowledge of Linux, at least at an RHCSA level, so that you can fix topics like this yourself. I'm not trying to sell you another course. I'm not selling you anything, because courses on this platform are all included. But really, I just want to make a point and make sure that you realize how important it is. Okay, so back to the identity provider. If you want to use the HTTPS WD identity provider, you must configure the OAuth custom resource. So there is a custom resource for OAuth. And by default, nothing is configured. You need to configure it, and that's what we are going to do. Now, this resource exists by default as a kind OAuth, and there is, in the spec, you are going to specify how to identify it. Like all resources, spec is containing the configuration, and identity providers allows you to set a specific identity provider. Now, the HTTPS WD identity provider uses a Kubernetes secret that contains usernames and passwords that are generated with the Apache HTTPS WD command. That needs to be configured. And this identity provider is a perfect way for learning how to set up OAuth. In real life, you are not going to use the HTTPS WD identity provider, but you are going to use some organization identity management system like LDAP, Active Directory, or whatever. Good. How do we configure OAuth? Well, here on the slide you have the different steps. You need to go through a couple of specific steps. I'll show you that in a little bit. I have a demo in which I'm doing everything step by step, and I'm not going to touch it now because that will mess up my demo. So, configuring OAuth. After changing your OAuth, you need to figure out that the OAuth pods have restarted, and in order to do so, you can use OC get pods -n OpenShift authentication. That will verify that the pods are available. And again, folks, consult the authentication and authorization guide for details about setting it up. And yes, LR, the documentation is available on the exam. Good. One more thing that you need to understand about OAuth in CRC, also known as OpenShift Local. So what is going on? Well, Red Hat OpenShift comes with an unconfigured OAuth by default. Code-ready containers uses OAuth for the default kubeadmin and developer user. So we will see a small difference in code-ready containers, which is not exactly the same in Red Hat OpenShift. And that is a configuration that is already available in OAuth.yaml that I'm going to show you in just a little bit, and that is not available on the exam. That is because Red Hat, because code-ready containers has been set up with a way to authenticate users as well, to make it easier for you. And then you are going to create an admin user. How are you going to create an admin user? Well, you need to connect the admin user to cluster admin privileges. OCADM policy. This is a command. OCADM policy. This is a very important command for your exam. We will focus on that a little bit. It has subcommands, and the subcommand here is add cluster role to user. So cluster admin is a cluster role, and admin is the user. You will notice that OCADM policy will tell you user not found. Oh boy, that is so confusing, but that is kind of by design. By default, OCADM policy is trying to look up the user, but in order to look up the user, it needs to access the external authentication provider, and it has a hard time doing so, so you are most likely going to see an error message. Now, once you have your admin user, you log in as the admin user, and you are going to check that it is working. The best way to verify is after you have created this admin user, you log in and you try to create some stuff, and if that works, then apparently you are okay. And at that moment, you can delete the kubeadmin user. Now, on the exam, there's a very nice challenge. You need to delete the kubeadmin user on the exam. On Red Hat OpenShift platform, the kubeadmin user is a hard-coded cluster administrative user. You can't change it. You cannot set the password. It's all hard-coded, and you need to delete it. Now, this is really an exciting moment on the exam, because if you deleted the kubeadmin user and you made an error in setting up your cluster administrator user, your exam is over. Simple like that. So you need to make sure that you only are going to do this once you have verified that the cluster admin user is working, is fully operational. Because if on the exam you delete kubeadmin, you don't have a cluster admin user, your exam is over. And you all know these exams are not cheap. You don't want to be spending the money twice. So be very careful. But do not forget OC delete secret. You delete a secret. The kubeadmin user is the kubeadmin user because of the use of this secret. Once you delete this secret, you don't have a kubeadmin user anymore. Now, in code-ready containers, the kubeadmin user is managed through OAuth, not through a secret, and for that reason, the procedure is different. If you want to do it on code-ready containers, OC delete identity develop kubeadmin is what you need to do. I'm not so sure if you need to do that, but this is how you can do it. What if it still is going wrong? Well, as a backup, after removing kubeadmin, you can use export kubeadmin is home/user.crc machine crc kubeconfig, and that will give you access to system:/admin. That works on code-ready containers. It's nice that this is an option, but don't rely on this too much. Avoid getting in there, because it will be a painful experience if you have deleted your kubeadmin and you don't have a working cluster administrator. I have one more slide, then we have a break. And after the break, I'm going to put all of this together in a big demo. Creating groups, that's the next thing that you are going to do. So groups are assigned groups are used to assign additional privileges to groups of people. And if you are adding users to a group, you must create the user in OAuth first. Now, the OCADM groups command is not going to verify if the user exists. So that is something that you really need to do for yourself. OCADM groups -H is showing you everything that you can do with these groups. And I will show you all of this after the break. I think it's enough for now, and we should go for a break. And I am going to give you a bonus minute in the break. So we make this a 13-minute break, which means that I'm expecting you back 25 past the hour. A large part of the next block is this demo about user creation. So it would be awesome if you have an environment available so that you can follow along if you want to. See you after the break. Hello folks, I'm back. I hope you're here as well. And we are going to continue. So what are we going to do next? Well, I have a demo for you. And I want to walk you through the demo so that we can set up the user accounts. So first, as user kubeadmin, we are going to do what? Well, we are going to create an HTTPS WD file. HTTPS WD -C. -C is for create. It will create a new file. -B. This is just some settings. Really, they are not so very important. The important thing is that you create your HTTPS WD file. I may give you an advice on the exam. Read through all the questions. Make sure that you create all your users at once. It is possible to add users later, but the procedure is complicated. The thing is that you generate this HTTPS WD file, then you need to feed this HTTPS WD file in the cluster, and only after adding the users to the cluster, the users will be available. That is where the secret is going to be involved. So if ever you are removing users or you are changing user properties, you need to go to this HTTPS WD file. You need to update your secret. That's a painful procedure that will consume a lot of time. And procedures like that will create problems on the exam. So do yourself a favor and make sure that you start by creating every single user that you are going to need. So you just repeat the HTTPS WD file a couple of times, but only the first time you run it, you use -C, because -C creates a new user, a new file, and overwrites the old one. So I'm going to make sure that I have all the users that I'm going to create, that I'm going to need later in this procedure. And yes, that is just a lot of typing, but hey, that's the way it is. So at this point, I have a TMP HTTPS WD file. The location of this HTTPS WD file really doesn't matter because you are going to load the HTTPS WD file in the cluster by using a secret anyway. So I created it in the TMP directory. TMP directory is just fine. Then I need to create a secret. And in order to create that secret, I need to be kubeadmin. So OC, who am I? I'm developer. That's not good. So let me get back to the kubeadmin shell. There we go. Control R for reverse lookup is the easiest way to get commands from past history. Now, based on the number of projects, I see 72 projects. That is sufficient proof that I'm kubeadmin right now. That's also something that we can use later to verify that the procedure was successful. Now we can continue and we can use OC create secret generic. If you create a secret, which is a generic Kubernetes resource, in secret there are different types. You have the generic secret, the TLS secret, and the Docker credentials secret. Most of the times where you are using secrets, you will use generic. HTTPS WD secret is the name of the secret. And we are putting from file HTTPS WD is /tmp/HTTPS WD. And then not to forget, we need -n OpenShift config. And that's creating the secret. Now, before continuing, I want to verify that this secret is really showing what I needed to show. So let me do an OC get -n on OpenShift config, and I want to get secrets. There we can see all of the secrets, and the secret that I need is HTTPS WD secret. And in case you are wondering, what is this HTTPS secret? Well, the HTTPS secret is what you are using in OpenShift local, aka code-ready containers, for handling authentication. Can you please ignore this HTTPS secret? Because I can promise you one thing, this thing does not exist on your exam. So just pretend it is not there. Let me use OC get -n on the secret HTTPS WD secret. -o YAML. That allows you to show the contents of the secret. And there we go, HTTPS WD. All of this is the base 64 encoded contents of the secret. And if you really want to verify it, then you can echo this thing. So echo to base 64 -d to decode, and then you can see that it really looks a lot like what is in my my TMP HTTPS WD file. Again, this is the message. You can't use files on local computers in a cloud environment. These files need to be imported in the cloud environment. Now we are going to do something else. I'm going to create a cluster admin user. So OCADM is what we are going to use here. OCADM is an incredible important command for your exam. So let me slowly show you a little bit what is going on. Here in OCADM, you can see that it is providing access to many more commands that are typically used by administrators. Hey, ADM stands for administrators, so that kind of makes sense. So OCADM is really an important command. And OCADM policy, let's do that with a -h as well, is providing access to security-related settings. So here you can see all the different security-related settings. Now we are going to use add cluster role to user. What is the difference again between add cluster role to user and add role to user? Well, a cluster role is a set of permissions that are applied at a cluster level. A role is a set of permissions that is applied at a namespace level. So if you are going to create cluster-wide authorizations, you are always going to use the cluster role. And you can see there's an add cluster role to user as well as an add cluster role to group. Well, we don't have any groups yet, so let's make that OCADM policy add cluster role to user. And then the cluster role is cluster admin, and the user is admin. I'll tell you later how you can get an overview of the different roles that are available. But there are some roles that you just want to remember, like cluster admin. That is so obvious that should come without any thinking. So cluster admin is the role, and admin is the user. And then I'm getting a warning: user admin not found. This warning is nothing to worry about if you are logging in as an external user, a user that's provided by an OAuth identity provider. This message, user admin not found, it is so confusing because you are thinking you are doing things wrong. No, you don't do anything wrong. It's just the way it is. So what is going to be next? Well, next I am going to continue and set up the OAuth. So how does that work? I'm using OC get OAuth cluster. I just want to verify that OAuth cluster exists. Yay, it exists, -o YAML, and I'm redirecting that to OAuth.YAML. And then we get this OAuth.YAML file, and in the OAuth.YAML file, you need to take specific consideration to what's happening right now. Because here, it seems as if nothing has to happen. That is not true. Do remember, we are on OpenShift local, aka code-ready containers. On this OpenShift instance, it is also, it's already using an external identity provider of the type HTPassWD. Just ignore that. You won't see that on the exam. Now, the interesting thing is that identity providers, as you can see here, is a list. And in this list, you need to make sure that you add an identity provider with a specific name referring to the file data that we are using right here. Oops, let me also forward the slide. What do I say on the slide? Replace current identity provider to kill kubeadmin and add the new identity provider. What does that mean? That means that the current kubeadmin user comes from the identity provider that we can see in this OAuth configuration. So the important thing is spec.identityproviders.htpasswd.filedata.name. That must be set to htpasswd secret. And once we have done that, we are going to replace -f OAuth.yaml. So what does that mean? That means that probably the safest way is to copy this stuff and to paste this stuff right here. And after pasting it, we need to clean up the YAML code a little bit. So I am going to use indentation because this is a list item, right? In a list item, identity providers has a list as its value. That means that you can have more than one identity provider. Now, if we have more than one identity provider, we must make sure that the file data name is different. HTPassWD secret is the name of the secret that we created. And the name, let me say my identity. Something like that. I need it to be unique. For the rest of it, we can keep the current configuration. And then we are going to do what? We are going to use OC replace -f OAuth.yaml. And this is the do or die. This is always an exciting moment. So let me do an OC get all -n on OpenShift authentication.